Can I ask what would this be used for?
So we're building an archive and a mobile app devoted to public art in Pilsen. So this would potentially be used in a website where people could listen in and hear about your work. Oh, did we just lose him? I think we lost him. Okay, we'll try that again. Hopefully he'll pop back up. Hi again. You're muted, Salvador.
Oh, you were
There you
telling me
go.
how. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, this will potentially be used on a website and a mobile app that we use. Less video on mobile app, but maybe some of your insight would help us, do some interpretation for anyone who's interested in public art in Pilsen. So, yeah,
So would this be used? Would this video be used for that platform or not?
It could potentially be used for the website. So if you're cool with that, you could, of course, we could make it just a transcript if that's what you prefer. But we do everything bilingually as well. So whatever you select, this would also be transcribed and translated as well.
Okay. Maybe once the footage is selected, just get if you can send me what's selected and then I will have to just approve it and see what has been selected.
That sounds great. Yeah. And just in the interest of time, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
In the interest of time, I think we'll start by asking you about a work that in our research is always kind of an important piece on walking tours I've given, and it's always a crowd pleaser, always inspires a lot of conversation, is the Declaration of Immigration. So we'll start, if you don't mind, with some questions about that. Also, going to say hi to Isaac and Angela too. They'll be chiming in. I'll let them introduce themselves, kind of when they do the talking. But can you start by just telling us a little bit about how that particular work came to be?
Yeah, I believe that was done in 2009 or 2010. I think it was 2009. During that time, I was working as a teaching artist at Yolocali Arts Reach, which is a youth initiative of the National Museum of Mexican Art. And I was interested in teaching in that platform because it wasn't so much about being an art teacher, but rather it was a practicing artist working and sharing knowledge with young creatives who were interested or curious in making art. And the goal for me wasn't so much for all of them to become an artist, but rather to work as a team and develop their creativity and how they can bring that to whatever field they decided to embark in. So that was kind of like the setup for that mural. And what I also like about that, it was more like project-based learning. We had a deadline of finishing that work in a certain amount of weeks, and we will meet. I can't quite remember exactly the details, but I believe that one because it was in the summer. In the summer, we were meeting daily, and we made I don't know how many weeks, maybe 8 or 9 or something like that. And what I like about project-based learning that we had to cover a lot, right? Like show them principles of art and design as they were literally making the work of art that also had a deadline, and everyone was accountable to make it happen, right? So that's how that project came about. And for me, that was important because it was an after school program or a summer program. And especially in Chicago and in other cities, a lot of the times there's a lack of resources for the arts. A lot of schools don't have art and music or either. So for me, that was important because when I first came to the States in 2000, I joined one of the summer programs and then later some of these after school programs where I took art classes, starting with photography. And that actually was what guided me to pursue a career in the arts. So to me, it was important the idea of doing full circle and then uh, sharing what I had learned in my experiences as a young undergrad then with older students and just show that there's possibilities being in the creative field. And on that note, when I study, my training was done in graphic design, and part of it was because I wanted to continue to be creative, but I wanted to be sustainable. And especially for my parents, since they migrated and did all this sacrifice to bring us over to the States, I just didn't want to be like, oh, by the way, I'm gonna be an artist, because that came with this stereotypes of not being sustainable or financially stable. So graphic design was a good way to compromise, where I was still being creative, I was still using photography, and I just got more interested in drawing and graphic arts like printmaking, and then later, I got more interested in sculpture and things like that.
So when
So
you
mhm.
sorry, when you were leading students to do the Declaration of Immigration, you were still an undergraduate student yourself?
No, I think by then I was done. So I finished. My God, I'm terrible with dates. I finished my undergrad 2004, I believe. So after undergrad, I was a practicing graphic designer. I worked on the field for
Ah,
five
okay.
years, and during that time, which is important, I have moved to Pilsen during that time, and my graphic design job initially was in Lawndale community, and then it moved to Pilsen as well. So when I started teaching at Yolocali, I was living and working in the same like area, like everything was really close by, which to me that was important when it comes to the idea of working with community for the community, and the idea of thinking about art in the public in a more holistic sense, that is not just about what sometimes is called parachuting artists, like just
Yeah.
sending an artist doing a project and then you forget about things, but rather it was about and probably even back then I wasn't so um, everything just kind of like fall into place and it makes sense that way. But looking back, that was kind of like the beautiful part about that project itself, that it was community driven. It was a lot of collaborations, and for me that was important, that I was living in the neighborhood and interacted with community, and the same the young artists who participated in the project.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the visual themes that are in that piece? I mean, you probably don't have it in front of you, but every time I've ever, taught it as a work of Pilsen public art, the question about butterflies and then these like kind of helicopter insect images come up. Anything you can help us sort of communicate to our students about how those images came to be?
Yeah. So a lot of it, just to give you a little bit more of context with the mural and how it came about. Uh, I'm gonna pull it out just so I can look at it. That's one of the
Sure.
good things of being able to do this virtually. You can just multitask this way. So, so the background about the content of this work also came about with the idea. Well, there were a few things. One, that there was a previous mural in this same wall by Robert Valadez, who that was also made with the Yolocali youth. in previous years. And at that time I was young, you know, I was in my 20s, and I was just eager to jump into any opportunity that was presented, even if that was beyond my skill level. But that's how I approached learning at that time and even now. So the director of Yolocali Arts Reach, Gabriel Villa, who is a friend and a mentor, reached out to Robert Valadez and kind of like proposed the idea, like, is it okay we do this mural? It will be about immigration. And during that time, you know, it was a hot topic, right? It's still a hot topic, but it's still, unfortunately, we're still dealing with the same issues and nothing has been resolved. Like that mural is still as relevant now as it was 11 years ago.
Yeah.
So Gabriel asked for permission and it was granted. And they prepared the wall and it was painted white. And Gabriel put a kind of like a printout of an announcement or explaining what was going to happen. And even before we started the mural, that kind of like generated a little bit of controversy because essentially it was erasing someone else's work and legacy, which at that time I wasn't really thinking about that. Um, and I got a call from other um, artists in the community who have done public work longer than me and were there, and they told me not to do it because that wasn't appropriate since it was painting over someone else's work. And I called Gabriel and he said it's okay, we got permission from Robert. But then, it kind of like created like a little bit of tension. So I mean, I didn't know better and I was just eager for the opportunity, and this was gonna be like, for me it was gonna be my first mural that I worked with the youth, that was gonna be uh, in a more visible area. The other ones have been at this point inside buildings, so it wasn't as accessible to everyone. So at the end, I decided to do it. I called other people, and they said, "No, that's fine. This is needed for this time, for this community, and don't worry about it." But that always kind of bugged me. It was always kind of like in the back of my head thinking about that. And
Do you have any insight, like Gabriel or Yolocali chose that spot like to paint over something that already existed versus finding a new spot? This is something we've talked with artists a lot about, about their own feelings about when their work gets covered up.
mhm.
But I guess my question would be, why that spot?
That spot was important because that building, that was um, the building of Yolocali. That was Yolocali's
Yeah.
building. That's where the art center was housed, and also Radio Arte, which it was a unique radio station that was um, youth uh, ran, and it was bilingual, which I think at that time it was, it provided a lot of platform for a lot of people who are now doing outstanding journalism. And it had this
Yeah.
similar model where youth would get training on how to record, create their own stories, and also edit music or DJ on the radio and stuff like that. So during that time, at least for me, I was in my 20s and I had all these friends who were involved in Radio Arte, but also in the arts, and I was living in Pilsen. So to me, it was like this hub of creativity. This is before gentrification was like really kicking in as it is now.
Yeah.
That is a completely different place. Um, so and I think for me that was kind of like a response. This mural was a response of everything that was happening in Radio Arte. There were several young people who were my age who were doing outstanding organizing regarding immigration and reporting about it and writing about it. And all that was an inspiration for us. But even further information about the content of this mural, it was also based on an exhibition that had happened at the National Museum of Mexican Art. I'm assuming maybe 2008 or earlier. And in that exhibition, I was not part of the exhibition, but I remember seeing it. And it had a great lineup of artists who were doing about immigration in different forms. Um, so during that time, Silvia Rivera, who was the director of Radio Arte at that time, who also has created amazing work for the community and continues to do so. She had she had written this text, and I was trying to look for the full text, and I haven't been able to find it now. But it's the full text of the Declaration of Immigration that we use as a springboard to consolidate these bullet points that we use in our mural. So that's kind of like, that's very important to me to point out, that it wasn't a one artist effort, but rather it was a whole group of people working on this mural in different forms. And so Prudence, her last name is escaping. She was working at your locality at that time. Prudence, I can't remember the last name at the moment, but she
We'll try to
helped
find her.
me. Huh?
I said we'll look her up. We'll
Yeah.
do some research. Yeah.
She was working at your locality at that time, as a youth coordinator or something like that. And she was a great writer, so she helped us edit down the text. Like, we had a few ideas, and we came out with this was the final text that we chose. But it was from as I mentioned earlier, from a full text that Silvia Rivera created with the based on the um, Declaration of Independence. But then Silvia Rivera created this Declaration of Immigration.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's some important information. And so after that, the wall was ready to paint on. I decided to continue with this, even though I was painting over someone else's work. Looking back, I probably wouldn't have painted it over someone else's work. And but also at the same time, if someone paints over this mural, to me, that's okay. Like, there's no way I'm gonna say, no, you can't paint over that. However, if the community and people want to keep it and they fight for that to stay, to me, that's what art in the public is all about. Having the people that interact with the work make the decision. And all right, so I think I went on a long tangent there, giving you more background information.
No. Very educational for us, and we'll continue to look up a lot of this stuff. And in fact, we've heard a lot of people suggest we talk to Silvia Rivera, and I know she's on our dream interview list. So,
Yes.
I mean, thanks for reiterating that. I know Isaac had a couple of questions about collaboration, because one thing we're trying to wrap our head around as researchers is, like, is a mural like a single person's vision, which a lot of the murals are, or where does collaboration come in? So I'm going to hand it over to Isaac for just a second to ask some of a couple questions in terms of that.
Yeah, so I'm Isaac. I'd love to hear about sort of how you understand collaboration and what that kind of looks like in your creative process, but then also if collaboration is something that extends after the work is finished.
Mm-hmm. Great question. Collaboration. I mean, to me, I mean, just the breakdown of the word, right? You collaborate on something. It's labor, right? It's work. whether that's creative or physical work. So for me, collaboration, especially in this settings, isn't so much about like everyone is part of every single process of the project, but rather it's identifying what is it that the in this case the young artists are interested in working or what they're good at, and they can also teach us. So collaboration from from my from a teacher's perspective is not so much about giving, but rather putting things on the table and see how we can all learn from one another, and and also empower the participants to know that they have unique perspectives and they all have something to contribute to this project or to a class, for that matter. So that's how I think about collaboration. It's learning from one another. It's also respecting one another and creating a safe environment for everyone.
You talked about some of the changes that Pilsen's undergone since you sort of oversaw the painting of the Declaration of Immigration in 2009. I want to know if you would still call yourself a Pilsen artist, if you've moved on. I frankly don't know where your studio is anymore or
Yeah.
where your heart is anymore. So we'd love to hear about that, and then also some insight about what the changes you've seen in the neighborhood, the good, the bad, and the ugly, about the pretty dramatic transformation that's underway right now in Pilsen.
Yeah. So after this mural, 2009, 2010, I had another opportunity to do another work for a hospital, and then after that, I left for grad school, um, which which to me was another big change, right? Like leaving Chicago, where I was comfortable. I had a comfortable income as a graphic designer and teaching artists, and I was exhibiting, making work. I had a studio, and it was just like good setup, right? But it was too comfortable that it made me uncomfortable, and I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to jump onto something else, and that's when I decided to go to grad school. So after I left Pilsen in 2010 or 2011, that's when I moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan for grad school. And to me, that was a little hard because I was so invested in that community. But at the same time, I had to focus on my studies. And before my work, it was more about community and working with people, but also like this personal perspective through my art. And all of a sudden, it was more about like centralized on the self. Like, okay, like when you go to grad school, you try to push yourself, you try to learn who you are, and also be open to many other things. So essentially, I was thinking like I can be in Chicago, like, and initially I was back and forth since it's only like 3 hours or so. And one of the professors said like you kind of have to start focusing on your work here, like instead of exhibiting back and forth, you should probably just focus here. And to a certain extent, I think she was right, but at the same time, it's like it was doable, and I was still doing my work in school and in the studio. Um, so I think for me, that was one of how I slowly started to see like, okay, I'm no longer I'm no longer living there, but it's still I was through social media, I was still getting a sense of what was going on. And every time that I would come back to Chicago and visit, for me the changes were more visible. I would come back and all of a sudden there were all these new shops or new things happening, and you can see that you have um, a different audience of a more young professional, either students or career driven people living there. And I wasn't seeing as much as of the señoras with their kids and walking around and saying hello to everyone like it used to be in the old good days. And to me, I think that was something really beautiful. When I spent years there, I got to a point where it doesn't matter where I was walking, I was seeing people that I met or were part of the mural or just in general part of the community. And then that slowly started to fade away. And after being in grad school for 4 years, I left to go to Massachusetts for another 3 years, and I've moved back to Chicago in 2018 to teach at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So that's when that was another decision, is like, do I go back to live in Pilsen? But it just didn't feel right, and also the rent was a lot more expensive. So I ended up landing in Little Village, where that was more important to me, in the sense that that's where my parents lived in the 70s for some time. So I like the idea of returning into this, once again, like this circle or spiral of coming back to where my parents once lived. But then this summer was crazy, of course, and the pandemic and bad issues with the landlord. And my partner and I ended up leaving that apartment, and we ended up moving to Austin now. So so now I live in Austin, Chicago, which is the very west side, getting close to the suburbs. So do I consider myself a Pilsen artist? I mean, to me, I'm just an artist. I think it's the work that that I did in Pilsen is there, and I think it's more like I feel a little detached in a good way. Like I feel like when I drive by and see it, I'm like, oh, it's still there. And there's of course additions of different tagging or spray paint or things like that, and I think that's okay. So I think I'm comfortable with the idea that the work's still there, but I'm not there, and I don't have to be there. It's just one piece of artwork that now belongs to the public, and I'm interested in continuing to work with community, but now it's getting to different mediums and different ways of engaging with people.
One thing we've heard from artists who are getting priced out of Pilsen or leaving Pilsen for various reasons, your story is very much in line with other stuff we've heard. For example, Isaac and I interviewed Sandra Anton Giorgi a couple of months ago, who's now working in Cicero, and other artists who are working on the far west side. Austin is interesting too. Is that where we should be looking for Latino art or Latinx art in Chicago? Is it the suburbs and the west side? It seems like there's a lot of art, there's a lot of work happening in these more disparate neighborhoods, but you don't have that concentration of Pilsen artists that you had even up to the early 2000s when you were working there. Any insight into that? Into like kind of where Latinx art is in Chicago?
I think Pilsen is a great example to point out, right? Like, for instance, a lot of people had no interest in Pilsen or 18th Street, in the 60s, for instance, or in the 70s. And that's when you can talk about like the pioneers of mural making in Chicago, right? Who started like with Mario Castillo, who I believe that was one of the first pieces of public art in Chicago. That was also coming from, the long history of Mexico with the Tres Grandes, Diego Rivera, Siqueiros, Orozco. And, they just wanted to make art in the public, and they created this this work. And then after that, Marco Raya, hello.
Yeah, sorry. I think we lost.
Sorry about that.
No.
So they're finally here. So I'm gonna come down,
Okay.
and should I email you, or I can leave this on as well.
About how long do you need? Like we can wait, or we can jump back on, when you're ready.
The thing is, like, this building is like, I need to go and find the elevator. I need to
Sure.
see where it is located and then bring it down. And so even though it might seem a simple task, it might take more like 15, 20 minutes.
Oh, that's totally fine. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll pause the recording. I'll stay on. Isaac
Okay.
or Angela, if you want to take a break, but so I'll be here, or
Okay.
probably will be
Yeah.
here.
I knew this was gonna happen at some point.
No, we did too. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
So not planning on receiving anything today anymore.
Well, listen, we won't take up the rest of your afternoon, but I mean, we are learning a lot, and I am grateful for your time. I know we all are. If I could just kind of remind you where you were when we left off, you were talking about some of those.
Yep.
I was asking about gentrification. Then you took us to a place that is really important for our research and saying, back in the day, back in the 60s and 70s, no one was interested in 18th Street. And then you mentioned some pioneering artists. I think you left off with Marcos Raya, started doing their thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I believe the first one, based on what I've heard, who I've never met in person, but is still in Chicago, is Mario Castillo.
Yeah.
I don't know if you spoken with him or
not yet. No, we hope to.
Yeah. And so Marco Raya is another person who pretty much just will paint murals on the wall, just no commission, no nothing. He would just bring his paints and put it outside. And of course, the other pioneer of mural making in Chicago is Hector Duarte.
Yeah.
I don't know if you chat with them before or.
Yeah, we've done long interviews with Marcos Raya and Hector Duarte. I sort of think of them as like personality opposites, but two of the pioneering figures in terms of, public art in the city and in Pilsen specifically.
Yeah, and also, thinking about Duarte kind of like study in the school of Orozco, I believe, like in the mural school of Orozco. So that's a close connection to that. But I think when it comes to Chicago, another important figure that usually doesn't get a lot of probably recently it's getting more recognition is William Walker. Are you familiar with William Walker?
No, I'm not.
William Walker created the mural called Wall of Respect.
Yeah, okay.
So William Walker, it's kind of like one of those figures who also just kind of like decided to bring art to the public and, like no real, I was gonna say no real agenda, but there was definitely an agenda there. But it wasn't so much about like, oh, let's beautify the streets or something like that, but it was more like, let's just do this. And I think I believe he was also influenced by the muralism happening in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a connection with Duarte and William Walker. Like I think Duarte moved to Chicago to do his first mural, and I think he was also inspired by the approach that William Walker was having with mural work. So probably you can ask Duarte more about that. He might fill you in more on that, but
will.
I guess what I was trying to get at is that in the 60s, there were all these artists making work in the public, murals and different things, but no one was paying attention because during that time, Pilsen was like a really dangerous area for people to engage with or to live in. So no one was paying attention to a lot of the work that was done there. And probably that also allowed for a lot of artists to live there in a more affordable housing price. And so yeah, so I think there's a connection there, right? Like as artists, we try to go to places where we can afford to rent a space, but then we also kind of create culture, and then developers see that, and then they come and buy things. And because a lot of the artists, we don't get the opportunity to invest in real estate, then we get priced out. And
Yeah,
you see
we
those
heard.
patterns a lot happening everywhere.
Yeah, and we've heard, some scary stories both from Duarte and Marcos Raya, who did move out of Pilsen, further west, like we were talking about before the break as well. This is something that we're seeing. As sort of a firsthand observer of the gentrification that's underway in Pilsen right now, you said that like when you went to Grand Rapids, you were coming back, and just that little bit of distance you had helped you see it change pretty dramatically in just a few years. Where do you think Pilsen is now, in terms of both public art and, that the culture that attracts the developers, as you put it, that then prices out the artists?
Well, I think I mean, it's going in the direction that a lot of older neighborhoods are at now. Like when you think about like Logan Square or Lincoln Park, those were areas that there was a big Latinx population, and then all of a sudden it changed, right? It shifted, and all of that is connected with history and the laws that are created in housing and also in the states, right? Like in the I believe it was in the 60s where we had a lot of what they call white flight. A lot of people decided to move to the suburbs, and now the newer generations are trying to come back to the city. So no one wanted to live in the city, and that's why a lot of the Black and brown communities move into the city, but now they're being displaced, ironically, kind of like at the outskirts of the city. And I guess for me as an artist that who recently just moved to Austin, I'm still just trying to get to know people, and see where I can come in with my art and facilitate that to the community. But I don't want to, it takes time to develop trust and relationships, so then I can slowly start doing something with the community that I live, where I live in now. So I think that's why you see a lot of artists moving to different places, and some of them are also being able to buy a property, which is also a good way of creating a stability in the long term. And I think that's a lot of the artists that get displaced is because of that reason. We're not able to create equity with real estate. We're gonna continue to be placed out, displaced. And I think for me, Pilsen now, like I still have a lot of friends, but those friends is still from that generation of artists who still live there, have lived there for many decades, but and they have seen more changes than I have. But a lot of the young artists and people who are doing a lot of stuff in Pilsen, I still don't know them, or I haven't met them because I was away for a while, and I'm coming in a few years back, and I'm not so much interested in painting anymore. I mean, I'm still interested in public work, public art, and community driven art, but I haven't really painted in the past years. I've been doing more like sculpture. So I think. Mhm. Go ahead.
That's the perfect transition to what we also want to talk with you about, because we're interested in Pilsen, but also interested in you as an artist. You know, we three are big fans of your work in ceramics. So I'm going to hand it off
Thank
to
you.
Angela in a second, but just kind of to get us there, could you tell us a little bit about your transition? You were doing graphic design, you went and got the grad degree, and then do you come back as a ceramicist, or what is your kind of journey toward the medium of ceramics?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, once again, it's one of those ideas of, or rather the limitations of labels, right? And creating categories for oneself. I like the idea of just being a maker, an artist, and then that just allows me to play with whatever I can or I'm able to put my hands on. So I think, I think for me, it's the idea of just embracing whatever it's available, right? Which is like this very, this idea that, my childhood was all about uh, the concept of rascuachismo, like making do with what's available. And I look at art the same way. Sometimes I have access to fancy equipment and sometimes I don't have access to that. So then I just figure out to work with what's available. So I think for me, moving from graphic design to get a master's degree, my area of study then was drawing. So I was doing a lot of drawing, and I really enjoyed drawing because it was an immediate way to capture my thoughts and ideas into paper, and it was very intuitive and very direct. I didn't have to think too much about colors and color scheme and all of that color theory, but I was more interested in just jumping into drawing. But as I moved away, before I started taking classes, I changed one of my electives to be ceramics because one of the artists in the area, Nicole Marroquin, was working out of Casaslan, another great community center, and she was really into clay. She still is. She teaches more art education, but she's also a great artist in all type of forms and mediums. And we had a clay marathon where a bunch of artists just showed up and the ceramic studio at Casaslan. That I think that's what it used to be, Elevarte, or before Elevarte had a different name. So after that night, I called my advisor and I decided to add a ceramic class as an elective, just because I have fun. And that's what you do with electives, right? I was like, I just want to explore this. And I really connected with the medium, but for a year, I was kind of like in the denial. I didn't want to deal with the idea of building sculptures and then holding them around. I was still in the idea of more of a graphic designer, like clean design, like simplicity, like put everything in my little car and go somewhere. And then eventually just ceramics, it started to be a medium that allowed me to break down all these complex ideas that I wanted to put in one drawing. I was able to break them down into smaller pieces of ceramics. That it also made my work, I think, more accessible in the sense that it wasn't so much for one specific audience, but it was because also it kind of had to do with the figure or with portrait. It made it the political more personal and more accessible. At least that's what I thought. And to me, that was important to do in grad school because one of the advices that I heard from many mentors is like if you go to grad school and you leave grad school doing the same work, you lost a lot of money and time, because part of grad school is just like to challenge yourself, but also shake you up a little bit, like try to remove the things that are not doing any good in your practice or life and embrace new things. And I think that's what happened with ceramics. And my ceramic professor is Joel Davis. he was really welcoming, and also just kind of like made it easier for me to continue to take ceramics as an elective for the rest of my grad studies. And my thesis ended up being all ceramic work, but a lot of it had, design and drawing elements, but it was all made out of clay. So I think, you know, clay just really allowed me to connect, I guess, in a romantic way with the past, in a way that painting wasn't quite doing for me yet. Or, I like the idea of coming back to painting, but I haven't found like a good excuse on how can I connect with the very heavy westernized uh, ideas and training of painting. And I think ceramics, the fact that it's what people call it craft medium, it's also a material that is available all over the world, and every civilization have engaged with it in their own way, um, and I really like that idea of connecting um, with many ancestors and many people just through the medium. It's such a simple, humble material, but it's still, we're still engaging and doing new things with it. And that's exciting. And I think, I don't know if it was just coincidence, but I started doing ceramics, and that kind of like it started.
Guys, can you guys hear me? Looks like we lost him for a sec. See if he comes back. We lost him. We'll see if he jumps back on like he did last time. Angela, feel free to get right in there with your question, Rascachismo.
Maybe we can also ask him something about how like really public art and working with ceramics is kind of similar, because like what he just said about using ceramics connects with ancestors, but it's also like easily accessible to anyone. Like anyone can see that and identify with it. And public art murals are kind of the same. So maybe we can have him.
That would be a great place to go next. I mean, and it's such a good point, like we're still recording and I shouldn't editorialize too much, but it is interesting to think about what he also said about an hour ago in terms of, like the accessibility of the mural, the sort of the legibility of the mural to anyone, and then taking ceramics, which I kind of going into this thought of as a finer art, like it's interesting to think about the ways he's kind of playing off of those connections, but also saying like ceramics is not, this like sort of rarefied art form. Interesting to think about. See if he comes back on. Actually, I think Angela's going to hop in if you don't mind, and we'll ask some follow-up questions to what you were telling us about just now.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Angela. It's nice to meet you. So I wanted to circle back to Rasquachismo. And I know Tomás Ibarra Frausto's pretty widely accepted art historical definition of it. But could you define it in terms of your work and how you feel like your work embodies that? I was thinking about this more when I was looking at your works in an imaginary world of Rasquache futurism.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, for me, I think it goes back to my childhood, right? Like living in growing up in a small town in Mexico. Um, you know, we didn't have tons of resources, so I think that I really attribute my creativity and solving to that phase of my life. You know, growing up, we would just make our own toys or figure out how to have fun with my friends. You know, so looking back, you know, that was a that's how we were using our creativity. The idea of making do with what was available at that time, and I think as a child, especially during that time, I even say it as this. I even had the luxury of being able to be bored, you know, of boredom, because growing up we didn't have all these new technologies and games and computers and pads and all kinds of stuff. So I remember several times just being bored and staring at the ceiling of the patio and just imagining things. You know, I don't know if the newer generations get even a chance to do that. You know, so I think for me that's where the idea of rascochismo comes from growing up in Mexico and seeing friends and family just making do with what was available. You know, whether it was fixing something in a very temporary manner, um, to, as you know, Tomas defined it as a more of a as a Chicano aesthetic. You know, that becomes this idea of you know, makeshift type of situations and and I love it. You know, I think when I was living in Little Village, I was able to see a lot of that aesthetics. You know, a lot of those houses. You know, people would put all these shrines to La Virgen de Guadalupe made out of, you know, as he described it, made out of bathtub or something similar to that. And to me, that's something that I wanted to bring in my art. And I think in the ceramic work, you know, even having I was given a lecture once at Kent State University, and one person saying like, but that word doesn't really seem that rascuache. You know, it seems actually more sophisticated. Like I'm not using that much found objects and things like that. And I thought that was a very valid point. And to my defense, I mean, I'm thinking about I'm still making do with what I have available. It just happened that now I have access to, you know, a good ceramic studio through the school and through the places where I've been a resident artist. Um, but that comment really kind of like stay with me, and as I move forward, I'm thinking how I can make it more rascuache and be more spontaneous and more playful with that. And I think after doing a residency at the color arts industry, I left with a lot of material, a lot of brass and metal material that I work, that it wasn't finished. You know, I had like a certain amount of time, and I was just on a crunch and trying to make as much as I could. I made one piece that I was very happy with, but I'm left with all these small little vignettes that I'm excited to revisit with more fun objects or different things that will probably uh, show more of that rascuachismo. or that makeshift aesthetic. But to me, it was also this idea, um, especially when thinking of Rasquache futurism, it was this inspiration from the pioneers of Afrofuturism, like Sun Ra and his music and films, and this idea of try to connect with a different type of reality. And I think for me, uh, as a brown person living in the United States, that was a good place to start exploring. And especially that work came out right after the election of Donald J. Trump. Like I didn't want to be so overtly political, or I was like, you don't even like deserve my time to do something about it. So I was more interested in creating this and it's slowly building like this new reality or this new world where you see more Latinx heroes and heroines and where I'm represented, right? And especially thinking of science fiction, a lot of the time, Black and Indigenous and brown people, they're not even part of the picture, you know. So I think the idea of futurism really allowed me to be more playful and also tap into other areas that are a little bit more freeing and less depressive in the sense of about the bad news that we constantly hear on a regular basis, right? Um, and I was also inspired by by Rodrigo Gonzalez. Rodrigo Gonzalez is like a musician from Mexico City, and he's known as the prophet of El Nopal, the Nopal prophet. And part of it is because he had just this very vivid imagination. There's one song in particular, Tiempos de Híbridos, like times of hybrid times or hybrid times. And when I first listened to that song, and once again, it was just very vivid, and I was like, oh my god, I can do so many art pieces based on the visuals that I can imagine just by listening to this song. It's one song that I go over and over, and every time I find something new. And in this body of work, kind of like it's influenced by that, by Sanra, by this music or these lyrics of Rodrigo Gonzalez, and and also tapping into, and all of this actually they're all connected to the 60s. A lot of them they did work in the 60s, and the 60s were just crazy times politically, worldwide, and I feel like we're going through a repetition of that in a sense. So it's kind of like interesting how things are connected in that way. But also in the 60s, 70s, there was this the funk movement, but also the funk ceramic movement in the West Coast, and for that, like I kind of like, I guess I'm inspired by the self portraits of Robert Arnerson, who did a lot of ceramic work that was self portraits, and then slowly became also more political and kind of like playful. So I think I'm embracing some of that um, history of ceramics, but also adding like this uh, pre-Columbian aesthetics and inspiration. And that's kind of like how I'm collaging all those different influences and into this almost like this trying to create this magical realism aesthetic. Like there's so much richness in all these cultures and this crossover. And of course, as artists, we always connect whatever we do with what's going on in our society, right? So I think that's how I think about the new work that I'm doing. It's just
we want to make sure Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We want to make sure this is like kind of late in the interview to ask for sort of basic biographical information, but we just want to make sure we get it while we have you on the Zoom. So if you could tell us just a little bit about where you grew up and how you got to Chicago as well. We just want to make sure we get the details right.
Yeah. So that's a good question. and that's also, try to make this a little bit shorter. So I guess the connection with my family in Chicago actually goes back to the 1900s, when my great grandfather helped build the railroads that connected, the West and the Midwest, and parts of the railroads, in the Midwest in particular. And that's something that I learned recently, a few years back, when I was visiting my aunts, and they showed me a picture of my great grandfather, and I made a print up of a lithography that is on the website based on this connection, and that's the only picture that I have of him, where he's just sitting on this chair wearing these work boots, and he looks very with a lot of presence. Back then, a lot of people didn't get photographed that often. So whenever you get a chance to get a photograph, I feel like, I don't know if it was also the cameras they were using, you have to stay still for so long so it wouldn't come out blurry, or what was the deal, but he just looks with a lot of presence, and he's wearing these boots. And the story that I heard from my aunt was that he always wore huaraches, sandals, like Mexican sandals. So that was the first time he had like these brand new boots they were given to him by, I guess, by the employer, because he was working with metals or whatever he was doing. So that's kind of like the first connection that there is with the Midwest and Jalisco. And so I was born in Jamay, Jalisco, Mexico, and it's close to Chapala Lake. And then my dad, that's kind of like the second connection where the Bracero program came in, the guest workers programs in the 1970s and 80s, around there. My dad was part of that program, and he would come to California and work temporarily, move back to Mexico and back and forth. But then later, to find more stability, he ended up moving to Chicago and started working here. And eventually I think through an amnesty or something like that, he was able to get a green card. And then after that, he married my mom from the same hometown. So in order for him to bring her over, he had to become a US citizen. And eventually he did that. And then they moved to a little village. And that's where 3 of my oldest siblings were born. And then after a while, they relocated the job for where my dad was working, but he was not invited to continue in the new location. So they sold the house and everything they had and moved back to Mexico. And my dad, bought a house there and bought land. So he started farming. So we lived out of the land for over 15 years. So I was born as soon as we got there to Mexico, and my youngest sibling was also born in Mexico, and then the other kind of like thing that happened was the North America Free Trade Agreement came in, and then so it's everything kind of like connected with some parts of history and things that are decided by our governments between Mexico and the United States. And because that really affected my dad as a farmer, he was just able to, thinking about the future for us, he just didn't think that it was going to be sustainable for us to stay in Mexico. Even if we were given a piece of land to continue farming, that wasn't going to be enough. So then he started selling things in Mexico to be able to move back to Chicago, and then eventually bought a house here, and we all moved to Chicago little by little, and that's how I got here in 2000. So once again, that's where really everything really started when it came to the arts, because I didn't know the language. I didn't understand the education system here. And I think the first thing as I arrived was just this raw reality that the United States wasn't really the promised land that everyone talked about, where everything was easy and accessible and handed over to you on a silver platter or something like that. And I think that's the reason why once I started doing that after school program in photography, that's when I first connected with something that I was able to express all those changes and ideas that were going in my head that I couldn't elaborate with the language. I was able to do that visually, and that's how I really got into art, really, just out of need and using that as a tool or as a coping mechanism to navigate living in the States, really. And I feel like even now it's like the only thing that kind of like makes sense for me, art. And that's how I can make sense of the reality of living in the United States with such political climate that keeps changing and evolving. And I think the key to all of this is really learning a little bit of history and coming to terms with who you are and really embracing that. I think it took me some time to get there, but I think I'm at a point where I feel really comfortable with who I am and what I do, and and it is this idea of I think a lot of people describe it as the immigrant drive. It's just like it's never enough. It's like doesn't matter how much you do, your parents are still kind of like, oh, cool. You do one more landmark in your career, and then they're like, okay, cool. Are they paying you? Okay. Like the idea of success is really how you defined it, right? Like I think for them, I think it's monetary. It's like financial stability and things like that. And I think for at least for an artist, like for myself, it's of course I'm interested in achieving that, but I'm also interested in what else can I do with my art, or how can I continue to grow with my art and where I show and what I do with it. And I don't know, it's really interesting, but I don't think I would it's one of those things that I think if someone would have told me, I guess I came here 2000, like 21 years ago, in 20 years or 21 years you're gonna be doing this, I probably wouldn't believe it. I don't think it was that feasible. But I think what happened with the immigrant drive is the idea of obstacles. There's so many, and you just kind of have to tackle them one by one, and then that just kind of like whatever you're doing right now kind of like prepares you for the next thing that you have to face. And then it's always one more thing, and then it's also the idea of so many people did a lot of work in order for us to be able to do this type of work. Like a few years back, the idea of having Latinx professors in university was not common. And that's the reason why I decided to become a professor. I never had a Latinx professor in my entire undergrad or grad studies. So to me, that was important, the idea of like, how can I get there? And now that I'm there, how can I continue to foster newer generations of people to continue to do that? And it's so it's an ongoing project, or it's an ongoing work, and kind of like setting the younger people with the same mentality, that to not get settled for everything, for anything that is just presented, but that they can ask for more, or they can that we can always do more. I think that's the idea.
two more questions, if you'll indulge us. The first one is, definitely grows out of what you were just saying. So many of the artists we've talked to have been immigrants themselves, or the children of immigrants. And of course, so many of the works of art that we're studying are about immigration, including, the Declaration of Immigration, and just so much that's on the walls in Pilsen. Like, can you help us understand, like, this connection? Like, why is art such an important mode of communication about the experience of being an immigrant?
I don't think it's so much about being an immigrant. It's about being a human. I think it's the thing with art. Art, the arts in general connect us as humans. So I think it's more the connection with humans, and I think part of it, in relationship to the connection with immigration, I think it's just this idea that we all come from somewhere, right? And the only people who were indigenous to these lands are the ones that actually having it the worst still, to this day. Their rights are not fully protected or granted, and I think it's that idea that we belong in this place. I think is that I think it kind of like comes from that perspective that we're contributing to the fabric of this nation. And I think we're doing a lot of this work for people to see, for people to accept us, and I think to create dignity among the immigrant community, and thinking like, like who are you to tell me that this is not my place to be when we're literally in a stolen land as we speak, So I think it's more understanding those ideas of how do we exist as humans, and what does it mean to be a human. I think it's that exploration of how to connect with others, so we can empathize and find the areas where we agree on, where we can relate, rather than the things that divide us. And then I think that's when people find out that there's more things in common than divisions. So I
One
think
of our audience,
that's the point that art really kind of like allow us to tap into. At least that's what I hope that allows for these conversations.
Same. One of the audiences that we have in mind for this project is kids. We hope that kids will get interested in seeing the art around them and in public art. So, just kind of as we close up, kind of a fun question is like, can you give us advice on how to get kids looking at art, thinking about art? Like, what message would you have for a kid who, if we can get them in front of a mural in Pilsen is one of our goals for this project, like, how do you want them to learn about how to look at art and interpret it for themselves?
I mean, I think it's almost more, I mean, I'm not sure if I understand your question, but I think it's more with the idea of, I think a lot of the times we think of young people or kids like they don't know what they need or what they want. And I think a lot of the times we underestimate how smart they are as young people. So I think part of it is listening, like what is it, or asking like what is it that you want to see, or just asking them what do they see in those works, because I think they will actually probably have a fresher perspective, or the idea of also just inviting them to see the beauty in those pieces of public art, or for them to describe them. I think that's where we can understand where they are at when they think about art in the public, and then based on that we can then share the stories, right, about how those works were done. or what was the reasoning behind some of those works. And I think that would probably be the approach that I would prefer to do. I think it's not so much about like telling them like you should look at this because of this, but rather it's like, oh, what do you see in this that you like? Or let's appreciate this. And because at the end, art making, it's all about telling stories. It's about capturing those stories. And it's about leaving something behind for others. And that's what public art does. It's like I feel like once those works are in the public, they don't really belong to the artist, or in this case, this mural, like it doesn't really belong to me. Sure, I work on it and with another group of students, but I don't see it as something that belongs to me. Like I think if people want to keep it, they will find a way to keep it up. If the newcomers find that maybe that doesn't fit with them, then that's they would do whatever they would have to do. And I think for me, I don't think I will be hurt or disappointed, but I think it's more about the residents who live there. And I'm actually surprised that it's still there because the museum had to sell that building, and now there's a Giordano's there.
Yeah.
Old things, there's a Giordano's there. What once was like this great hub of creativity and art center for visual arts and for radio. Um, Now it's a Giordano's and apartments. So I think, if anything, that really tells you how the community is changing.
Yeah.
Something that was very community driven, now it's commercially driven. Um, but yeah, I think there's need of the arts in all places, and I think at this point, Pilsen, has plenty. So I think if artists live somewhere else, I think it probably will benefit those other places where the artists are living to start having more art there. Like that's what I'm hoping to slowly figure out how to do in Austin, because Austin is a place that really needs needs more um, art centers or after school programs, and they're probably not getting the resources that they need. And it's interesting how now in Pilsen there's a lot of resources and there's a lot of investment and things happen a lot quicker, when in the 60s 70s, if people ask for something, that would not happen. Like someone once told me about the city will refuse to pick up garbage on 18th Street. uh, at some point, it's in the late 60s, that was the story that was told to me. So as a form of protest, all the residents kind of like dumped all the trash in the streets. And I wish there were images about that or something like that. But I think that's to me, that's the thing that is important. Is like when communities organize and work together, things can get done. But it's also the responsibility of the city to be equitable with the resources that they put in all communities, and not just the ones that they're trying to develop. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing we've seen is that the city trying to take an interest in muralism in Pilsen by creating a mural registry to prevent problems like murals getting painted over, like we saw in a few cases recently. Have you been following that registry, or do you have a take on that at all?
To be honest, I haven't followed that. No, I haven't followed it, so
Yeah.
I don't know where that's at. But I mean, I think that could be a great tool. But also on that note, the Gabriel Villa, who I mentioned earlier, that's a great example of that. Like the owner of of a bar, what's now called Maria's Bar. I don't know if you guys are
Okay.
familiar with Chicago and Bridgeport. There's
Oh
this
yeah,
bar,
Maria's.
Maria's.
Yeah, yeah,
That's kind of like a very trendy place now.
yeah.
Well, before, once again, about the old good days, talking about 2009 probably, Gabriel was painting a mural there. The the owner of the bar is the mom and the son. Told Gabriel, "Hey, you want to paint a mural? There's this wall." And Gabriel, I think, he was like, "Yeah." So he created this mural really fast, actually. Like in 3 days, it was getting pretty close to being done. I went and helped him a little bit, and he wasn't even done. And then he was whitewashed by by
Oh,
the by the graffiti crew, thinking that that was graffiti. But I mean,
yikes.
obviously, it wasn't graffiti. It was what I heard. It was more like the alderman was bothered by the imagery because
Wow.
Gabriel was creating this social commentary on the on all the cameras that were around the city, and he used it. Like, it's foggy, the image. I'm pretty sure it's still online, but I think it was like a crucifixion with the camera, and there were some sort of like a sunset or something like that. I mean, that was a straight up censorship. That
Mhm.
wasn't graffiti or anything. And I think the city kind of like approached this as a way of, oh, we're just told that it was graffiti, but obviously that wasn't graffiti. That was a commissioned piece of artwork that was there, but someone just felt uh, that that shouldn't be there, and they whitewash it.
What was that location on Maria's in Bridgeport, or was that a different location prior to Maria's?
It's in the same location, but before it was in Maria's. I think once again,
Okay.
even that area has also been gentrified, and also it's more trending now, and things are changing there. There it was just an old school bar, one of those great Chicago bars. I remember there was this lady there as a bartender, the owner, and she had a collection of dolls. It was kind of creepy, but just a great installation. Um, so yeah, I guess there is also the idea of censorship or defacing the mural, which is something that happened to the Declaration of Immigration. Um, Interesting enough, like around 2009, when we were making that work, for a little bit there was a bunch of like a straight up white supremacists tagging and attacking Pilsen with graffiti and and swastika signs as well.
Okay.
And that mural, before we were even done, it was defaced by by that spray painted. And I think I have some images on the website or somewhere online. There are some images where it says that Mexicans are racist or something like that.
I
But that
remember
was
that.
something that
Yeah.
happened to that mural, and that was something that I had to, you know, of course, at the beginning I was bothered by it, but then I was able to. I had to tell the students how can we approach this, and the way we approached it was more like, well, at least now more people are looking at the mural, more people are reading our message, our demands, and I mean we were able to fix it just fine. But
That sounds demoralizing, though. While it's underway, I didn't deal with the fact that it's getting defaced, while it's still in process.
yeah,
Pretty demoralizing stuff. Well, listen, we have used a big chunk of your day in this, but is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about you, your work, public art in Pilsen? Anything else we haven't covered that we should have?
no, I mean I think right now I have a new project, like I'm interested in the challenge of making ceramics more accessible and equitable, I guess. So I'm part of this organization, the Color Network, and that's where we try to create visibility for people of color in ceramics. But also in Chicago, I'm developing this community-based project, and I just launched a website called Arcilla Arte Cultura. So it's this idea of working with the residents in Little Village, because that's where I was living, and I got a grant from the city, from an organization, Three Walls, that with that money, what I'm doing, I'm trying to connect with residents from Little Village and try to use clay as a conduit to community building. So once again, it's tied to this idea or what I learned from mural making, but now it's more on the idea of community engagement and how can we create art, but also have accessibility or create accessibility for people to work with clay, which is it's a little bit more
I was
difficult.
tooling around. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, because it's a little bit more difficult in the sense that
I was tooling around on your website on that. Sorry, we have a lag. I was tooling around on that website earlier and saw some of the ways that you were engaging community members with clay. Just out of total curiosity, that's personal. Like, do people find clay intimidating as a medium, or like, is it easier to get someone to pick up a paintbrush and collaborate on a mural than work with clay, or is there a difference there?
Well, I'm still in the developing phase for this project. I'm in the research and developing phase right now. I just gather a bunch of materials. I'm gonna create this. So a lot of things changed too, right? Like when I got this grant and what I proposed, my idea was to work in community and gather people. But obviously with COVID, that just changed things altogether. So now I'm creating the ceramic kits that are gonna be sent out to, or I'm gonna deliver to people, and we're gonna work remotely. And then I will collect their work, fire for them, and then bring it back to them and document it. So it's this idea of, I'm thinking more almost like as a gift. It's like giving them a piece of clay so they can mold to whatever they want. And I guess to answer your question, I think clay is actually a little bit more intuitive. Like you give a piece of clay to anyone, and without even telling them anything, they're gonna start doing stuff with it. So I'm interested in creating these workshops and see how that goes. So hopefully sometime in February we're gonna have like the first one, and I think because of COVID, it's gonna become a little bit more of an intimate workshops that are set up in groups, and maybe when the weather is better and things are probably safer, try to do some outside where literally bringing a potter's wheel or just clay to the streets and just share that with people. And so I'm interested in trying that out and see how that works.
That is such a cool project. I love that.
And I hope that this kind of like maybe taps into some future projects. Like I'm interested in using ceramics as art in the public. So like thinking more about like mosaic or relief, something that is more permanent with clay. But obviously that just needs more funding and more planning and more logistics when it comes to weather, making sure that it's appropriate for this weather and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's how I'm hoping to re-engage with the idea of murals or art in the public. With I'm hoping to try more clay sculptural things. Painting is still kind of like dormant in my studio right now. I love printmaking, but painting, I'm still finding a way of connecting with it. You know, like as I mentioned earlier, it just has this heavy Eurocentric connection, and I'm hoping to there's a few projects that I'm thinking about bringing painting, but I think I'm thinking more about like in the styles of kind of like the Aztec codes type of work. So that's kind of like, if I get back to painting, I'm gonna tap into that. So not so much rendering or stuff like that, but more like illustration, graphic approach. But um, it's just an idea still. It's
Well,
brewing.
I have no doubt we'll be watching you as you do that, and your public ceramics work, which is so cool, and we'll be stalking you down the road. So,
Thank you.
but really want to say thank you for your time today. We've learned a lot. We've touched on a lot of stuff that we've already been interested in for our project, and you kind of pushed us in some interesting new directions. So
Mhm.
just want to say thanks. And we will be back in touch about like how we could potentially use this. So we're completely nonprofit, we're completely educational. We're also grant-based too, as well as just getting information about muralism out into the world, into the community is really just our only goal. So
Maybe one thing that I don't know if you reached out to them or to her rather, but like Yolocali Vanessa Sanchez
Yeah.
is the new director, and I think since she took over Yolocali, she's also has created um, a different type of programming that I think has also, the community has really responded really well to it. And I think they're based in Little Village right now, unless things have changed. But I think that would also be a good